Hello and welcome to Decoded with Ramya. I'm Ramya Kamalnathan, and today marks a milestone I'll never forget. After years of working behind the scenes in technology and innovation and speaking on panels, this is my very first time stepping forward to host a public conversation. And I knew that if I were going to begin this journey, it had to be with someone extraordinary. This conversation also marks the beginning of a new series, Digital Architects in Governance. In this series, we spotlight visionary leaders who are redesigning how government works in the digital age. These are the thinkers and the builders shaping policies, systems, and innovations that will define the future. My guest today is Honorable Dr. Parnivel Tyagarajan, Minister for Information Technology and Digital Services, Government of Tamil Nadu, India. To me, Dr. PTR is not just another public figure. He is a powerhouse of talent, a rare combination of academic brilliance, global financial expertise, and a deep rooted commitment to public service. From MIT to Wall Street to the corridors of the Tamil Nadu Secretariat, his journey is unlike any we've seen in recent times. If governance were an orchestra, many play their part. But Dr. PTR conducts with rare brilliance, harmonizing data, vision, and humanity. What sets him apart is not just his credentials, but his clarity, conviction, and courage to reimagine what governance can be when powered by data technology and integrity. Leaders like him remind us of what is possible and why we need more voices like his shaping our future. So today, our purpose is simple yet profound: to have a conversation that bridges governance, innovation, and inspiration. We'll explore how data technology and AI are not only transforming Tamil Nadu, but also setting a blueprint for societies everywhere. Dr. PTR, thank you so much for being here. I think it means a great deal to me personally because one, you're an inspiration for me, and this is my first interview, so I'm really happy that you're here. Uh, I literally took notes on your achievements, accolades, your family history, legacy, and it's unbelievable. It's impressive, right? Starting with your family legacy, you're literally standing on the shoulders of a powerful legacy. Your grandfather, Sir P.T. Rajan, he led as CM of the Madras Presidency, I think in 1936.
Briefly, yeah.
And then your father, PTR Parnivel Rajan, he guided the Tamil Nadu Assembly. He was a speaker. And now you're probably carrying the torch into a new era. How do you feel about that?
Well, first, thank you for having me and for the very kind introduction and this opportunity. Actually, I think such legacies are both a great blessing and also, in some sense, quite demanding. My family's involvement in the movement dates back to my great granduncle, who actually served as the patriarch of the family after my great grandfather died early in his early 30s. So his younger brother, who was my grandfather's Chittappa, was actually the patriarch of the entire joint family. And he was very heavily involved with what was first the non-Brahmin movement, that then became the social justice movement, and then the Justice Party, as it was later known, was started as two different entities. One was called the SIPA, the South Indian People's Association, which was a joint stock company, where people like my great-granduncle, my family, financed it in order to run a non-profit kind of federation of the social justice organizations called the SILF, the South Indian Liberal Federation. So the SIPA and the SILF were, one was a registered stock company, limited stock company, incorporated, and the other was a society registered in 1916. And November 20th was the SILF, in fact. So we see that as the birth of the Justice Party. And so from then till now, it's almost 109 years. So we've had some engagement with it continuously, with the brief exception, shall I say, when my father passed in 2006 and when I came back to public life in 2016. So in that sense, it is a deep responsibility, I feel, to continue the good work of my forefathers, both in terms of the movement, which is intended to bring social equity, inclusion, empowerment of all citizens, irrespective of gender, community, religion, background. And through that, which I can say as a former banker and as a somewhat well kind of trained professional in the social sciences, through that better economy, better per capita results, better human development, better social development, which is proven around the world.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm extremely blessed. I feel grateful every day for this legacy, but I'm an only child. And so at some other level, it was always in the back of my head, even the 30 years between my graduation from college from NIT Trichy in 1987 and my coming to public life in 2016. I don't think there was ever a time when I didn't feel like one day, someday, I will have to come and serve the public. So it has been, collectively, I would say, it has been a huge blessing that my former party leader, Kalinga, and then my current leader and chief minister gave me the opportunity to fulfill my dream and my sense of obligation and follow in my forefathers' footsteps, and of course to the people for electing me and giving me a chance to serve.
That's amazing. And you spoke about your educational background, and I was, pulling up some facts about what you've done, right? You've done your BTech in chemical engineering, you've done your master's in operations research, PhD, which I think is a fact that I just recently learned about, is human factors engineering, engineering psychology. And then, of course, you did your MBA in the most prestigious MIT. And, as you march forward, you've worked in the finance industry for a very long time and multiple roles. You started as a trader, you were a portfolio manager, you've headed the offshore capital markets. The list just keeps growing. And I was sitting and thinking, how would I best describe you? And these are the words that come to mind. I wrote it down literally. I said, distinguished, visionary, accomplished, erudite, and formidable. How would you introduce yourself?
I think I would look at it slightly differently. I would say eternally curious, incurably curious, and therefore a lifelong student. I actually had no plan. If you look at that career, I could take a slightly negative lens to it and say that, in fact, somebody senior in one of my firms when I interviewed told me that I was a dilettante. He said every year, every couple of years, every degree you keep changing. You don't have any depth. You keep switching because you get bored easily. But I think for me, it has always been about learning, about better understanding of the world, better understanding of myself, better ability to relate to people. And so it came naturally. I didn't, like, some of it was my father. My father insisted that I should go to engineering. I actually wanted to study commerce. My father insisted that I should go overseas for graduate school. I was not really that inclined. But ever since I went overseas just a few months after I changed 21, after that was all me. After that, choosing to stay overseas for that long, getting a PhD, then getting an MBA, then at the age of 35, ripe age of 35, going for my first job with a paycheck, because till then I'd been running my own consulting practice while a graduate student and after I got my PhD. And so I think, I suppose it was a luxury that I never felt the pressure. I think I stopped taking money from my parents when I was 22 years old. And after that, I had enough of a career even as a part-time consultant when I was a PhD student, or I got my master's 22. So roughly from the day I became a graduate student in my doctoral studies, I've been financially independent from my parents, and therefore I had the luxury of doing what I wanted to do. I suppose in some sense I always was backed by my family legacy, in the sense that unlike most people, I didn't worry about building a retirement plan or a pension plan. I knew that I was born relatively strong in assets to inherit. I'm only child, so again there wasn't any real risk. So that allowed me to keep thinking, and I've been so fortunate because, of course, as I say, in retrospect, it might look like there was some planning or thought to it, but looking at it prospectively, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, or to make the right decisions in the right motion. So even if you look at my experience, I would say I've always felt that I was a far better consultant than I was a finance professional, though I was relatively successful in the world of finance. I always thought that consulting came naturally to me because it had so many facets. And at the end, successful consultants, like successful traders, have a lot of empathy and are able to gauge the room, like good politicians also, I suppose. But in that sense, I would say that at every step of the way, I did what I thought made sense to me or what seemed attractive to me. Even in banking, I had two completely different banking careers. When I was at Lehman, it was all about highly complex products. It was about financial engineering, it was about derivatives, about securitization, about global kind of accounting models and potential arbitrage in terms of pricing based on different accounting models. And it was only in the major centers of the world. It was largely New York, London, to some extent Hong Kong, lesser extent Tokyo, and that was about it. Whereas in my time at Standard Chartered Bank, I did the complete opposite. I did very mundane products, very basic products, foreign exchange, interest rates, money markets, automation through e-commerce, and I did it in all the emerging market economies of the world. So Standard Chartered, which used to be Standard Bank and Chartered Bank before merger, were basically both colonial banks financing the British Empire's expansion. So wherever there was cotton or tea or coffee or rubber or all the way from Australia to the Caribbean was the range of this bank.
So you're traveling all around the world.
Yeah, but it was a completely different exposure, different learning curve. So I was very fortunate, both in my academic career but also in my professional career, that I kept being able to build on what I knew with a lot of things I didn't know. And so, I don't know about all the adjectives you use, but I'd still say
I think it still applies.
incurably curious and continuously learning.
And that's a good skill to have, right? To keep learning.
Yeah.
I had a note here which said you also were an inventor or a co-holder of a US patent. Like methods and systems for providing structured loan commitment transactions.
Yeah, it may sound a bit more complex than it really is, but actually what it is when the world of it's a little bit of an involved explanation, but maybe I'll try to do it in 120 seconds. So till the 1920s, till the Great Depression and the big crash of 1929 or whenever.
1929, yeah.
There was no separation between investment banking and commercial banking. Banks could do everything they wanted to do. And in the analysis of the big market crash, the Great Depression's initiation, one of the things that led to the creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission and much more banking regulation was the discovery that if you're a lending bank or an operating bank, let's say that you're a company and your payroll accounts and your accounts receivable and payable and your operating accounts are with the bank.
Yeah.
Actually, that bank has a very intimate view of your business. They can tell ahead of time whether your business is growing, whether it's going to run into difficulty, whether your customers are paying your bills, whether you're paying your deliveries properly. And so it's almost like, super information compared to the average person in the market who owns your shares or your bonds, because all those are only through an exchange or through the securities industry standards, even after the SEC. So what they really discovered was that banks before the crisis, in particular, I think they used JP Morgan as the example, all those companies whose operations were still solid, they kept the loans and the accounts as private.
Okay.
And all those that were looking shaky, they sold off into the market as shares or bonds into the market. And so the public got damaged and the bank stayed safe. So they brought in a regulation called the Glass-Steagall Act. Among other things, they brought in the Securities Act of 1930, then 31. They brought in the SEC. They also brought in the Glass-Steagall Act that if you do commercial banking, you can't do securities underwriting. So if you're on the private information side, you can't do public market securities. And if you're on the public side, where you're underwriting securities into the market, then you cannot be in the private side. You cannot be seeing this. So that was the Glass-Steagall Act that separated commercial banking and investment banking. And that by the kind of 2000s, they started to break down, 1990s. And so they allowed first the merger of Salomon Smith Barney and Citibank, and then JP Morgan and Chase Manhattan. And so that basically created universal banks. Once you had universal banks and then all the big German banks, the Credit Suisses, Deutsches, then pure play banks like Goldman or Lehman or Morgan Stanley, we were at a disadvantage because we didn't have the balance sheets. And we basically were not able to do what was strictly speaking illegal, but people were doing, which is once you had a big balance sheet, you say, I will only give you this $2 billion loan if you let me underwrite the bond that is going for some other transaction. It's called credit tying. It shouldn't be done. Anyway, long story. So in the course of that, we had to end up doing some kind of liquidity provision as an investment bank, even though we didn't have the liquidity to provide it.
Okay.
Because we're not sitting on big balance sheets. So to compete, we had to offer this kind of liquidity. So instead of offering loans, we started offering what we call backstop liquidity. That is, if for some reason you don't have access to the market, if your commercial paper program dries up, then we will provide you liquidity. But those are very dangerous commitments because they'll only hit you for that when they're already in trouble. So actually, it's a very risky thing. So then we were talking between my friend and I, who was a rates trader, government bond and rates trader. And he said, Tyaga, there's some value in the optionality of whether a loan should be fixed rate or floating rate. That fixed to floating option has value. You can price it. It's a swap option. So that option, why don't we embed it into this credit backstop? And that way we can monetize some of the risk because we are taking unlimited risk by giving them backstops. And so we worked out something and we went in a couple of different ways, and basically that's how we came up with the patent. So I won't say it was much of an invention. The world was changing a lot and we were trying to not be all risk and no upside. So we just merged a couple of products together and came out with something.
I mean, that's amazing. But I think people who are in the field of finance can totally get it. Before we get into more questions around technology and policy, I just wanted to take a step back on your own journey. I know you talked about, carrying your legacy, family legacy forward, but from MIT to Wall Street to Tamil Nadu Secretariat, not everybody's actually thinking about a path like the one that you've chosen. So how has your global experience, both in education as well as in finance, given shape or thought to how you drive leadership or delivery in government?
Well, I think actually, again, I won't take much credit. I would say at some level, I knew I had to come to public service. To be honest, I kept deferring it. I won't say postponing it, but deferring it till the day when I thought this is the right day. So I've spoken about it many times before. I had multiple opportunities starting at the age of 30 to leave the kind of professional overseas expatriate kind of banking, finance, consulting world and come. And for various reasons, sometimes consciously, sometimes beyond my control, it didn't work out till I was 50. But once I got here, I think I realized that as with other things in life, bringing unique skills to any kind of context or unique background always is marginally value adding. So there are not a lot of people in this space, in elected MLAs or ministers, who have had this kind of professional qualification and this kind of exposure. So in that sense, you add to a perspective, right? The whole notion of even a social justice movement or an inclusion movement is the same as many of the things we used to talk about in the US, which eventually became DEI, but what we used to call of as diversity in my time, which is that to really get good outcomes, you want a diversity of views. Like when I was a trader on the desk, it was opposite of politics. There on Wall Street, if you said yes, there was no value. They much valued people who could say no. Like, you went to a trading meeting.
Yep.
You went to a traders meeting, and if the leader said, I want to go long, if everybody else said, I want to go long, there was no value to that meeting. So the guy who said, no, I think you're wrong, we should go short, that guy got respect because he had some view. And of course, you had to back it up with data and some assessment and analysis and so forth. So in that sense, both from a philosophical notion of multiple ideas coming together is what really gives you the right kind of best case outcome, as well as the notion of social justice. All of you should get a seat. Plus the fact that I've had a relatively different track. I think all of it helps me in having a view that is a bit unique in terms of administration, in terms of policy and so forth. Of course, the luxury of having worked in different countries and different regimes also adds value.
I think that gives you the global experiences.
I think the most important thing is because I was in a highly regulated industry and at my global CEO level, even when I was at Lehman in my last job of offshore capital markets, I was simultaneously, my activities and my team's activities were regulated by the US regulators, the UK regulators, the Hong Kong regulators, the Japan regulators, some extent the Singapore regulators. So I had to make sure I was fully compliant with all the different regulations. I had to be cognizant of them, make sure that my team was aware of them, make sure that the culture was such that all of us followed them. And so that kind of risk management and kind of adherence to standards and adherence to best practices, I think that has helped me a lot, even here in my time in finance. I was at a different kind of level of what can I say, regulatory concern, right? So in fact, I initiated a lot of reforms, including the reforms of the audit system, where I didn't want to wait for outside. I tried to reform the internal audit system of the government. On the one hand, building independence, not allowing departments to audit themselves. And on the other hand, building competence, because historically these auditors were not necessarily trained to be auditors. It was considered kind of a rotational job. And so we started professionalizing it and trying to get better compliance at the operating level rather than wait for something to have been done wrong and the AG's office to tell us that it was wrong.
Which makes a lot of sense, and it's almost the theme that I'm going for, which is your future-proofing policy with the rigor of technology, right? And you just mentioned, backing up data, and I've heard you say many a times when what gets measured gets managed, right? So when you're faced with complex challenges, how do you approach that decision making? And if I'm really thinking about risks and outcomes, how do you balance that? And sometimes there's this constant tension between idealism and realism, right? So how do you go about all of that?
Well, even this morning we had some review of one of the most vital agencies in my opinion, the government of Tamil Nadu. It's called the TNEG, Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency. And as I mentioned, in many places we've been greatly accelerating the integration of the government's databases, cross-referencing, validating tens of millions of records and making sure such simple things as the name of a beneficiary, we know it's the same person because all the other things match, the age, the address, the pattern matches, but then the name is spelled wrong, things like that. So even now we're trying to figure out how we resolve all these things. But I would say, broadly speaking, I gave a speech in Madurai day before yesterday when we launched some program for the government to provide special benefits to children who we can identify as either orphans or who have lost one parent and the other person is disabled or has some other limitation. Till now, we've never been able to do this. Now, with the right data, we're able to do this, and so we're giving them additional support. And it's fascinating when you talk to them. Some of them are with their peripas, perimas, ates, mamas, some of them with their grandparents, some of them in kind of, state supported or NGO supported homes. So it's really fascinating to see this. But my point is, I think at that speech, I said, I have always felt, and I've been saying this since I was in opposition, that the three essential attributes for being a good politician and a good administrator, as far as social justice and social equity is concerned, is first, you must be a compassionate person with real concern for the bottom of the pyramid, whichever dimension that is. But that's not enough. Second, you got to have the data to know who's actually in what situation. Most of us, we don't have the data. The government ought to have the data. In a lot of cases, the government doesn't have it. In some cases, the government has it but doesn't know where it is or doesn't know how to use it. But once you have the concern and once you have the data, then you still got to be able to execute properly. And you got to have proper fiscal management, proper, kind of execution schemes. And so I think these I've thought of as the three kind of core attributes of a humane politician. In fact, in many cases, the private sector, irrespective of scale, like if you go around Tamil Nadu today, even the local petikadas will have a POS terminal with a GPay or UPI interface.
Right.
And inventory management happening from the major vendors, the Mondelez, the Unilevers, the Tatas, the Godreges of the world, where they're tracking the inventory through the POS. So they know when to restock. But we're moving in the right direction. I would have liked it to be faster, but that is probably the biggest disappointment or frustration for me.
I think speaking about data, one of the things you're most celebrated for is bringing that transparency and precision into government. And I think Tamil Nadu is actually a front runner in open data. I think we've seen that with the budget dashboards or your fiscal intelligence platforms. So, what goes on behind the scenes? And I'm really thinking in terms of how do you run the government with efficiency like that of a high functioning enterprise, right? And to your point, all the while trying to stay human first.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's probably kind of 2 or 3 levels of operating, and then there's 2 or 3 levels of communicating about the operating. Right? I mean, and I'm just thinking about this as you ask, it's not pre-planned in my head. But the first question is, are you operating professionally, competently, with data, with the proper kind of framework and outcomes? I think the second is that in a lot of cases, people just get frustrated, whether it's government employees or politicians, and feel like I'd like to do, the right thing at a macro level, but it is so hard to do. Like change is so hard to implement generally, but it's 10 times harder in government than anywhere else. And then, therefore, you end up doing a lot of micro level things, which is much easier to do, right? And it's much easier to advertise and much easier to create kind of perception. Communicating about it is something else altogether. I think that what separates kind of true change agents from marginal kind of improvement, most people communicate for the sake of politics. Some people can communicate policy, but in a way that is more kind of incremental. And I think the great skill in politics is if you are capable of both visionary kind of levels of change, systemic step change, and also have the capacity to communicate that to the people and take them along, right? And that's probably the biggest disconnect in the world. There are many, many professionals in all fields who, given the chance, could greatly improve the functioning of government.
With better communication.
But they are not in this place. There are many people in this place who have good communication skills normally as being politicians, but they don't have that kind of background. And then there are people who ought to be kind of, some combination of both. So I would say whenever there has been real change, either it has been driven out of a crisis where the system requires you to change, there's no other way, or almost as rare is to find suddenly one day you have a leader who is capable of both envisioning and delivering real change, and then communicating well enough to take the people along. And that, I think, is really the holy grail, right?
And I think you've cracked that code.
I don't know about that, but that's.
I just want to switch to AI.
Yeah.
AI is often described as this new electricity. It really has the power to light up every home, but it also has a risk of sparking fires if you don't handle it carefully. So, and Tamil Nadu is working on its AI policy. I think it's rooted in ethics and.
I think we published one. We've done an update, and of course, you have to keep refreshing this regularly.
So, what's the vision behind it?
Well, I think in places like AI, if I'm honest, the odds that regulators or the government is going to be ahead of the market or innovators or companies is very low. It was true in financial services, it's true in technology. Normally the technology evolves first, and then the regulators play catch up or learn where to put in firewalls or learn where to put in kind of circuit breakers and things like that. So AI is no different. I think it would be hard for me to imagine any government anywhere in the world being that far ahead that they can envision and shape the future of the innovation process. But even if you're doing it retrospectively, I think, as you say, on the one hand, you want to get the benefits of it. On the other hand, you want to avoid what could be the worst case. That's all regulation. But in the case of AI, at least for me, at least for the short term, I think the 2 or 3 defining variables will be how much data and how accurate is the data. That is the basis for everything, because these models need a lot of data to learn.
Garbage.
And even if they learn well, the notion of extrapolation, like if you think of intelligence as processing cognitively from input to output as one kind of cognition or one kind of intelligence, and the other is imagining things that you have never seen before or innovating. Then I think, as it is for human beings whose brains actually infinitely powerful, if you really think about it. The more we think about AI, the more we realize the beauty and amazement of the human brain. The odds that you can get a machine to replicate anywhere near what I would say AGI in the near term, to me, is very low. I'm not saying it's never doable, but I'm saying as somebody who has seen multiple versions of the future is here as far as AI is concerned, from the neural networks days and all that. What has changed now, in my view, is that you have infinitely more data being created than ever before. The cost to store it and kind of manage it remotely in places like the cloud has dropped dramatically. And the ability to get access to computing power of high capability and therefore high cost, but without having to spend the full capex yourself. So basically the leasing model of computing power as opposed to the owning model, which again comes through the cloud. I think these are the major changes in this era of AI to any other era of AI. So in that sense, if you ask me, I think there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of the leveraging of automation. I'll just use the word automation for the current process of AI. And generation is on the marginal edge of automation because in theory it's something new, but in practice it's based on the model it learned, right? So you see many examples where the model's biases are very obvious, right? It's the data set that went into teaching the model determines the quality of the output and the bias of the output. But if you look at the risks, I think right now the risks are much more in the intentional risk bucket. That is deep fakes, that is intentional scams, that is intentional, take down somebody. It is much less in the nobody wanted it, but the machine became evil and took over the system kind of deal, right? I think for now, maybe I'm wrong. So I think for now, the state's job is much easier. You prevent malicious intent being implemented with AI. That's the easier job. And we have regulation, and then we prosecute people, and then we learn from every kind of violation. The real difficulty will come when you have some semblance of AGI, which I think is maybe two decades away, maybe it's a decade away. And then you have to worry because with no malintent, it's possible the machine becomes so powerful that it can start doing things without anybody actually keying it. After all that, I would say the bigger question is not so much about AI. The bigger question is we have a socio-political, socio-economic construct of society that we have collectively agreed upon, which is inherent to the notion of a constitution or a republic. We have licensing bodies for professionals. We have regulatory constraints. We have only a doctor can give a death certificate. We have only a radiologist can say what is wrong in the x-ray. We have only a chartered accountant can sign off on the tax return. These are all intended to be structural to the societal framework. Division of responsibilities, qualifications, regulations, certification, accountability, etc. I don't see us giving that up easily as a society. I don't see us giving it up to a machine. Because it would be stupidity to give it to a machine that is not accountable to anybody to be able to take those responsibilities, right? So as I say, I've seen the best kind of AI models in chest x-rays. But once the machine is done, some radiologist has to sign off and say, I take responsibility that this is the diagnosis or this is the prognosis.
So it's almost like having the human in the loop.
You have to me, I don't see how we take the human out of the loop, both ends of it, both in terms of parsing the data for the model to learn, particularly in non-English, non-kind of white, non-OECD countries. We don't want all of AI in the world to be driven by some American kind of prototype data set, right?
Okay.
We need the diversity from all of us. So our data sets are even, less deep and less broad. So we are seeing lots of people create these. I saw a movie the other day called Humans in the Loop, which is like a 72-minute docudrama.
Okay.
And by pure coincidence, it was brought here by the director and producers and so forth, and I hosted a dinner for them. It was a fantastic movie, but by coincidence, the model of AI work, the kind of AI data labelers, taggers, sorters, separators that they had used in that movie came from a company of a friend of mine called iMerit, run by a lady called Radha Basu, who used to work with Dave Packard of Hewlett Packard. She's one of the pioneers of the Indian diaspora in the Bay Area. And she has this company, and I opened her Coimbatore office with about 300 odd people. And they are parsing data for autonomous vehicles.
Nice.
So, what is a pram? What is a baby? What is the likely behavior of a woman pushing a pram compared to a woman pushing a grocery cart? When will they leave the walkway and cross into the parking lot? Right. These kinds of things the machines are being taught.
So what are some promising use cases you think AI can help in the public sector? And it could be education, it could be healthcare infrastructure, any department for that matter.
Yeah, I would say the three immediate that come to me. First is the validation of eligibility and insurance of inclusion for government schemes and programs. I think AI can
Across
play a
all
huge role across all departments, across all schemes. I think if you have clean data sets and clean citizen data sets, birth records, so education records, community records, you can create address, voters ID, whatever. Between that, you can kind of figure out. That's how we were able to identify these children who have lost
Like
both
orphans,
parents. So it came out of the TNEGS database. So I think the first thing we can do is use AI, and that will bring 100 benefits, because it will bring not only better clarity, it will bring resolution of our biggest weakness right now. Our biggest weakness right now is if we have a government program, those who are most in need of it are the least likely to be able to access it. Why? Because most likely they are less educated, most likely they are less tech savvy, likely they are more prone to living alone. Most likely they have less support system. And these are the people we want to give the support to first, but they have no way of even knowing the scheme exists, let alone coming and figuring out how to get included in the scheme. Right? So I have a case study. So these are inform me. I have a case study of the Mudiyoru Itoge, and we've done it with JPAL and with the University of Michigan and so forth. And we've looked at the data when I was in my old job. And so I think the first and best thing we can do with AI and with good data sets and with automation is to start ensuring the schemes reach those who they're supposed to, and that nobody is left behind. And in the sense that they will remove friction costs from the process of getting the benefit you're entitled to. You should not have to go to a physical office. You should not have to carry your papers. You should not have to have the risk of some government official, trying to seek rent while doing the work that is supposed to be done. So all these other kinds of advantages come. And so I think, and again, I have a concrete example. If you're a government pension receiver or pension benefit receiver, you have something called a life certificate. You have to submit once a year. Just basically say, I'm still alive, so keep paying me. In theory, your record should be so good that if they die, the death certificate should immediately be flagged into the pension system, and you should know. But in practice, that doesn't work. So we do the reverse. We ask people to submit. When I was in finance, we basically signed an agreement with the Department of Posts, with what they call the Postal Bank or something, India Post Bank. And what we do, we ask the mailmen who are going out to deliver the mail to carry a little device to do ID. And they go to the home and they check that this person is who they are, and they give a e-life certificate into our pension program. So imagine what that does. Instead of having to find out which office to go to, find a doctor, get a doctor to say you're alive, and then now we're making it even better. Now we have apps which basically you look into it, and based on your movement and all that, it can show that you are that person and you're actually alive and not just a photograph. And so, but let's even take the first stage. Imagine the first stage itself, how big an advantage it is, where for 70 rupees, which was the fee the post department agreed to, 70 rupees once a year in your house, particularly if you're disabled or without a car or without transport, you can sit and get validated for the next 12 months, as opposed to finding out where to go, getting a doctor to give a document. They may be at two different places, then taking the document to the right office, then hoping you get a proper person who's willing to process you right away, and then worrying about whether
might
the
take a year on its own.
I mean, at the very least, it'll take you few hours of your time and potentially a few hundred rupees of travel and other disruption cost. So that way, I think. So this is the first thing. But I completely agree with you, both in education, in terms of the ability to tailor educational support and guidance to the progress of the individual, as opposed to one size fits all. Or to help the teacher who has, like all human beings, limited memory and limited kind of continuity of what was the 10th paper ago that this person wrote compared to today, but the machine knows everything. So the ability to use AI and a learning model to help customize the delivery of educational support. Even if it's the same teacher, the teacher can say different things and do different things with different students based on their level. So I think there's a huge potential in education. I think there's a huge potential in healthcare. I've just told you that the X-ray AI I've seen is better than any doctor, at least on 99.999% of the
Which
cases.
is still good.
So there's still a lot of places, but I think it all starts with 2 or 3 things. One, how good is your data set? By good, I mean on the one hand, it should be broad and deep. On the other hand, it should be accurate. It's a very complex thing. Governments have better likelihood than most people because governments, by design of the state, of the republic, are both the repositories of data and the ones that tell you it's right or wrong. The government says whether you are who you are by giving you an ID. So in that sense, the governments are in a good place for that.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to have the right mindset in the political and in the bureaucratic, kind of leadership, that we should learn to do better and more. And the last point I'll make is that around the world, I think, but certainly 100% true in India, all governments of all states and the union, there are fewer and fewer human beings employed in these jobs. It's got various reasons, I don't want to get into it, but the stats are the stats. The total number of government employees is actually on the decline. And that is despite, as far as India is concerned, the population is still increasing.
And give me like top factors that are contributing to that. Maybe top 1, 2 factors of not.
Well, I think the first is that the recruitment process is so cumbersome and so complicated and so subject to judicial intervention by anybody who feels that they have been wrongly, excluded. That the ability to bring people in is far lower than the automation that does retirement. You hit a certain age, you retire. To actually bring people in, you have to go through, somebody fills a form, somebody tells the TNPSC, then the TNPSC has to design the exam, then you have to put out the notice, then people have to apply, and so forth. And then, sometimes the scale is just mind-boggling. Most people don't realize. In 2022, the first time we decided to hold the Group 4 examinations after the 2 years of lockdown of COVID, we announced only about 7,000 jobs. Then after my portfolio change, it was increased to 10, or maybe at mine portfolio, and then it was increased to 14 or 15. But let's just start with 7,000. For that matter, let's start with 1,500. But when it was announced as 7,500 jobs, Group 4. We had 2.4 million applicants for these 7,000 jobs.
That's pretty high.
2.4 million, and many of these were graduates, double degree holders, PhDs, whatever. These are Group 4 means lowest level entry jobs: junior assistant, technical assistant, driver, potentially security, whatever the lowest level. And the pre-qualification is 10th class pass. That is the academic qualification for Group 4 your time. For 10th class pass, there were people with PhDs applying. A different story. It tells you something about the structure of jobs and wages in society. But think about, you're a professional, you work in a big company. You've been through many universities and educational programs. Think about what methodology will give you confidence that you're picking the best 7,000 people if there are 2.4 million applicants. Because if I give you a written exam,
no.
Yeah, because if I give you a written exam, my best guess is if even 0.1% of the people get it right. That's like 24,000 or something, right?
Yeah. You're still not going to be able to whittle it down.
So how will I pick now the first 7,000 out of that, right? So it's basically, I think the system needs improvement, but, I had started the work, but I was not long enough in the portfolio. I set up a human resources reforms committee. Other governments have tried it. The ADMK government before us had a one-man committee to look into government employees and things, and it was a decent report. I saw it, but it has never been made public and was not implemented. So it's the need of the hour, and I'm sure other states have done other things. I'm sure the government of India has done something. So my only point is that there may be 100 reasons, and there may be either conscious or subconscious, but the fact is that the total number of government employees all over the place is declining. And so automation or AI or whatever it is not just a qualitative but an absolute necessity in terms of your ability to process more and more volume and more complexity with less and less people.
So I want to shift to innovation closer to home, which is Madurai. Can Madurai be the next digital capital? And it doesn't have to be just Madurai. I mean, any cities that is outside of the metros, if you will.
Yeah, I think actually I'll give you like one example or two examples. In Madurai, two of the biggest employers in the IT space. One is HCL, the big Indian IT major. And one is Honeywell, which is a US technology firm. Honeywell has, I think, a few thousand employees, 3,000 something. They've just announced they're going to expand further. And their best cybersecurity and AI and drone work in the world is done out of Madurai.
Oh, nice.
Right? Not like a BPO or anything like that. I'm saying advanced work. You take HCL. HCL started 7 years ago for the first time with a few hundred employees. Last year I went and was chief guest for their anniversary celebration. They had like 6,000 odd employees. And they were doing amazing things. Like they are running some of the lotteries of the US. They are running, they're doing miniaturization of dialysis machines for the Japanese market.
Nice.
They're doing any number of advanced engineering and highly regulated complex processes. So if the question is, does the talent exist, across the spectrum, the answer is absolutely yes. And especially places like Madurai or Coimbatore or other places, because the educational institutions are all around there or within range. We had a company called Pinnacle, which is a building information modeling and digital twin company. They went from 0 to like 1,800 employees in less than 2 years. Now we've given them more land. We've agreed to help them build a hostel in the grounds so that people can stay Monday to Friday and go home only Saturday, Sunday. They're doing more and more things. We're working closely with them. But that CEO was telling me the reason he chose Madurai is that within like 100 or 150 kilometers of Madurai is about 60% of the kind of engineering workforce that they're able to identify that is local, like that is Tamil. Right, but of course, 150 on this side may take you to the border and this side, or maybe 200 kilometers. But and just as an aside, you may know that the districts with some of the highest education and literacy in our state are actually Kanyakumari and Tirunelveli, more than Chennai, because of the long legacy of the Christian missionaries and the institutions that have been there for hundreds of years. Different story. So, in the notion that you find the talent wherever and anybody can do everything or anything, you're only limited by your ambition, your desire, your exposure, your education, your kind of mentorship. Then, of course, it's possible. But what is even more important, I think, is to find somebody who can be the kind of motivator, the instigator, the originator. And in both these cases, there were Madurai origin Tamilians who had gone and done well in other parts of the world. In the case of HCL, in other parts of the world, they wanted to come back to Madurai. In the case of Honeywell, at Honeywell, or you take one in Chennai, there's a big NBC Comcast Universal, a Comcast NBC Universal, which I think they may have sold some part of it, but at one point was one of the biggest conglomerates because it went from, till last year, let's say, when I went to open it 2 years back, they had grown from something like 300 people to 7,000 people in like 5 years, right? And they were bringing a lot of AI work from China and all this stuff. Again, I asked the question as soon as I walked in, I said, who's the guy who came back? And there was one person.
Just one.
Who had, no, there has to be one person to be the seed of it. I'm saying, that like when I came for Lehman, right, part of how Lehman grew so much in India was because I said, I have to go back. My father passed away. I have to be back in India. They said, oh, you're going. So if Tyaga's going, okay, then I'll also send some. I'll also do this. I can also do that. You'll also do that. That's how it works around the world. So I think both are essential. The one we have a lot is talent on the ground. 20% of India's engineering STEM graduates are being generated in Tamil Nadu. The other is, of course, you need to have infrastructure and all that, but most of our big cities are decent with airports and connectivity and roads, power. But to me, the big difference is this intellectual and organizational culture leadership. And that will create, and that can be a 5% company, it can be the cutting edge. I've just gone and seen a senior of mine from Ooty in boarding school, also IIT Madras graduate. I inaugurated. He has a physical AI product called Make GPT, where you go and with English language prompts, you tell it what kind of system you want to build. I want to build a drone performance management system. I want to build a soil health monitoring system. I want to build a lorry route tracking system, whatever it is. And basically, with all your prompts and a bunch of questions back and forth, will not only tell you what all components need to go into it, but the box has one of some 40 types of components. So it knows like what you should need an actuator for, what you should need a sensor for, what you should need a kind of, a motor for, or what you should. And it'll make you a PCB by connecting the right parts of the PCB and give you, this is a prototype, this is what is needed in the board that you will need to get made. And this is the spec you must send to the manufacturer to get it done. And in some cases, that manufacturer can be in Madurai itself, right? Because we're a relatively big supplier to the defense industry. So I'm saying this innovation came because that guy happened to be from Madurai and came back and set up. His company is probably 20 or 30 people. But it's like, earth-shattering kind of improvement.
Yeah.
So I think, the talent, the infrastructure, support, all these things, but it needs the people who can think like that. And usually the people who can think like that are people very rare to find, like, born geniuses who have never done anything else but suddenly get the vision and the idea. A lot of it is people who have put together a lot of things in their head and then suddenly, create something. So that's my view. Maybe I'm wrong.
And how do we ensure that any of this innovation doesn't just exist in cities, but it also spreads to the rural and semi-urban areas? Just create.
Yeah, I think the first step is to make sure it's not all one city based. It's not all Bangalore based in Karnataka or Hyderabad based in Telangana. I think Tamil Nadu does a decent job because we're the most urbanized state.
Yeah.
I think we also, and more than that, the chief minister is very conscious. So, we have made every effort. Like in the next week, I'm opening this IT&T hub, which we started in our government, the Innovation and Technology Hub of Tamil Nadu. We have one in Anna University now. I'm opening 2 more campuses, one in Madurai and one in Trichy. In the short order, we'll open one in Coimbatore, eventually in Salem. So almost everything we do, we want to at least get it to second, third tier cities. We are also connecting every one of 12,650 villages or something in the Tamil Nadu fiber net. Even today, I had
Is that the TANFINET?
Yeah. That's what TANFINET Tamil Nadu fiber net.
Okay.
And if we get that connected, then we'll basically have a 1 gig backbone across the state. I mean, in the cities, the government doesn't need to do it because you can already find in this location of. When I came back to India in 2007, in the central part of Chennai, you could get a 1 Mbps DSL line. That was it. Now in this, which is not quite central but not quite suburb either, in this location I can get multiple service providers who will give me a fiber line to my house at 300 Mbps or higher, right? In fact, I have 2 fiber providers, one backs up the other in case one goes down. Because the reliability is not that great, the cables are running over ground and sometimes they get cut out of the weather. So, but my point is that that the infrastructure is also now expanding to the rural areas. So I think it's hard for us to guarantee that every village in every part of the state will be a big innovation center. But the reverse, I will say, a lot of this innovation has to come in a distributed way. Like the solution to problems of energy, of recycling, of sustainability, of kind of, what can I say, loss of agricultural jobs being replaced with other economic activity as automation and agglomeration happens. A lot of this cannot come top down. Some of it has to come bottom up.
Bottom up.
So I think the government of Tamil Nadu again has invested a lot, not in IT, but in the MSME sector. We have something called Startup TN, where we're encouraging innovation and startups, not just in tech, because at some level, tech, it's very hard to be a MSME that is successful as a tech startup. The whole nature of tech is if you're successful, you can go scale. You shouldn't be MSME. At some point, you should no longer be MSME if you're in tech.
I think that
yeah.
sort of like takes me to talking about like your private-public collaboration, right? I think I've heard you say this in one of the interviews as well, that government should not just fund innovation, but should co-create it, right? So in that sense, what do you believe is a good partnership model for like a public-private collaboration?
I mean, there are many models. Many have been tried. I was once at an award ceremony where we gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to Dr. Manmohan Singh, and I was one of the guests. Mr. N.K. Singh of the 15th Finance Commission was there, but the chief guest was Nitin Gadkari, who's the current highways minister. And he was very explicit in his speech, and he said if it wasn't for Manmohan Singh, we wouldn't have all the models of highway financing that we have now, the hybrid asset model and the different PPP models. He was the innovator, he was the pioneer. So, many versions exist. My philosophy on PPP is that there are things that government can do decently, there are things only government can do, and there are many things that government simply is not structured to do. And then there are things that the private sector can do much, much better than the government. There's a discipline that comes with public financing, meaning market financing, that will hold projects to a different level of professionalism. There's a different skill set that comes from large, corporate players. And so I think PPP is beneficial in many ways across fields, not just in technology, but even in construction, in roads, in power plants, in many things. And I have been saying that for a long time. For example, we have this announcement by the CM that we will have a 1 million square feet in 18 acres of Elcott Park in Coimbatore, 3 towers for AI-based work. Now, Elcott historically is not a great construction manager or building creator. It's not Elcott's core competence. There are private players who specialize in building world-class office spaces. The second problem is it'll probably cost a few hundred crores. I agree that Elcott can borrow it probably cheaper than developers can borrow it. But then Elcott's ability to manage construction and manage the financing of construction is far inferior to any other commercially, kind of run operation. And after it is built, the odds that it can be marketed to get full market price for the rent or the lease or whatever is much higher with a private player than it is with Elcott. And most important, the odds that you can maintain that building to a global standard and, keep everything perfect is much higher with, let's say, a Brookfields or a Cushman & Wakefield than it is with the government. So therefore, from the beginning, I have always thought, and this was when I was in finance also, I thought the same way, that when it comes to a lot of these projects, the great luxury of involving the private players who specialize in this, especially the bigger players, is that A, they bring resources and access to capital that the state doesn't have to put all of it. B, they bring execution capability and professionalism at a scale that the state simply doesn't possess in-house, right? And most importantly, C, after completion, their ability to market it and get the fair price in terms of rents or input back to offset the investment, as well as maintain it to world-class standards, is much higher. So for all these reasons, I've always thought. Now, when it comes to innovation, it's even more so, because I think the odds that there will be any bigger data set or there will be any more ubiquitous reach than the state is zero. By definition, the state touches everybody and the state has every data. On the other hand, the odds that the government, with its traditional approach to and status quoist approach to administration, is going to create any kind of innovative outcome relative to five guys who are bright and whatever, by guys I mean girls, guys, whatever, in a room, is zero again. So I think the fit is that the state brings the power of information and the ability to give use cases that are of a scale that individuals simply cannot get to. In fact, the ideal model is, were we to get a significant amount of data, and because we are the government, we can afford to buy the equivalent of one massive kind of supercomputing platform, whether it's quantum eventually, or even now if it's a bunch of, I don't know, $100 million worth of NVIDIA or equivalent GPU powered hardware. Then you could basically potentially leapfrog the entire kind of AI kind of, competition. Because if you made this data set available with the appropriate privacy controls and access to this kind of computing power for the right startups through some filtration, they would be able to do amazing things, right? And so
I want to be conscious of your time, but before we close, had a list of questions which I thought would be great for sort of a rapid fire round. And it doesn't have to be like short, concise. Think of it more of reflections, if you will. A leadership mantra you live by.
I would say, it's hard for me to say, empathy is the root of everything, right? Like, always try to think of yourself in other people's shoes.
It's people first.
Yeah.
Got it. The most difficult policy decision you've had to make and what it taught you.
Policy decision.
Yeah.
Well, it's too dangerous to say anything in government, but I'll say when I was a banker, the hardest decisions were to cut the bonus pool because you have to make sure that you're fair to everybody, and it's a limited pool. So it was always one of the most stressful times of the year.
Yeah. One tech trend you're most excited about and one you're conscious of or cautious of, sorry.
I think the possibility of providing voice-based automated services to citizens is hugely kind of attractive to me.
And that's in implementation right now, I think.
Yeah, we're doing like WhatsApp, we're doing other things, but to eventually make it 100% voice-based, where we're building the voice, content. We're doing a bunch of components to it, but it's not imminent. But I would say if the right support and the right resources were given, probably within a year or a year and a half, we could get to that. But if you do that, I think it is so democratizing, because now I can start advertising on radio and TV and say, call this number, and we'll figure out if you're eligible for Urime Toge, right? And so I think then you'll be truly, because otherwise you have a selection bias. Those who have access will find a way to get in, and those who you really want to reach will not have access. So that I'm very excited about. What I'm cautious about, I think the more and more kind of image and voice manipulation that is available with AI.
Yes.
It is amazing the amount of fakes that come. And as social media is fragmenting our worlds into our own little kind of echo chambers, then I worry that fakes can get much more traction without being realized as fakes. Yeah. And so you're going to have social kind of disruption or tearing of the fabric. I worry about that.
And what advice would you give to a young person choosing between a career in tech, policy, or public service?
Wow. I don't know. I think, for most people, the trick is really finding out who you are and what makes you happy, what motivates you,
Yeah.
what. Of course, if you're so poor or so short of resources or support, then these are not meaningful. You do what you have to do. But for those of us who have the luxury of not having to worry about a meal or clothing or a house, and most young people who go get a decent education, probably in the world we live in today, will reach that point. I would say at that point, then it should really be about what is it that suits you, helps you get up every morning, and keeps you excited as you keep learning and growing, right? Because I think, of course, public policy is a hugely impactful, hugely exciting, interesting, engrossing kind of field. But the problem is that the ability to actually implement and the ability to see the results of your work, you have to learn a lot of patience. And that's if you're a minister, it's if you're a think tank person, if you're a consultant, if you're in the World Bank, wherever. But in terms of tech policy or tech kind of careers, I would say it's also a very exciting time because, in my view, this is a bit of an inflection point. Till now, you needed to be a really good programmer to really be a great innovator because you need to actually sit and write the code yourself. Now, take this Make GPT, for example. Basically, you can be just a deep domain expert or a very empathetic person or a good logical thinker about compliance and accountability, and you can actually have a brilliant career as more and more of the base IT work gets automated. Then and there's this whole history, I'm sure you've seen, that sometimes innovation increases the skill of the job title and reduces the volume of people required. Sometimes innovation goes the other way. It reduces the work required of the human being, but then it reduces the pay and it just increases. So sometimes it can take away the cost. But I think with AI, it will be kind of very clear trend that more and more of the mundane work will go away. And more of jobs that we have not contemplated till now will appear. Because at the end, we live as a society, as a community, as a republic, as a state. We cannot let machines make substantive decisions on anything without a human being somewhere in the loop to sign off on it. So I think that's the kind of final distinction.
And finally, one thing you would still like to accomplish in your role as the IT minister?
I have a lot of things I'd like to accomplish, but I would say in the time between now and the next election, which is about 6 months, I would like to say that at least at a technical level and at a systemic level, I left behind a much better IT department than I walked into. I can certainly say with fair degree of conviction that when I was 2 years Minister for Finance and Human Resource Management, I brought more change in 2 years than probably since 2003's FRBM Act, or Equal State Act, FRA Act. And many of those changes provided immediate results. Many of those will continue to provide results for decades. And some very senior people in the union government, both politicians and senior civil servants who are otherwise not inclined to my political philosophy, were kind enough to say the same thing. So I hope that what I did in finance and left my mark, I will have done in IT broadly and left a much better TNEG, a much better LCOT, a much better database of the government, a much better family integrated data system, a much better automation for beneficiary selection and kind of identification, all of the things. But collectively, that I professionalized and accelerated the transformation.
And I have no doubt that you'll be able to accomplish it. So good luck. Thank you so much. I don't know if we ran over time, but I would say this conversation, or more of Q&A, has been like really rich with insights. For me personally, it's a privilege as well as an inspiration. But I'd love to ask, what is the message that you would want to share with anybody who's either building or thinking about or reimagining the future of technology and society as a closing?
I think the world is getting more complex. The world is getting more fractured in many ways. It is becoming more disaggregated. And it is getting more complex in every way. The scale of the economy, the volume of population, the amount of variability between different places. So I think in a lot of ways, the era that we lived in between, let's say, 1945 and 2025, that era is over, and we're now in some new era, globally, economically, trade integration-wise, technology-wise. But at the heart of it, I think, if you take industrial revolutions as technology also, from water to steam to electricity, then IT has always been IT in its truest form, from analog digital converters that brought everything into the kind of data world, to personal computers, to thin clients, to the network, to the internet, to kind of IoT, to Industry 4.0, now 5.0, to AI. It has been always about making people's lives better across society, not just about one person. Or it has led to improvements, but part of the job of a government, of politicians, of policymakers, is to make sure that that uplift doesn't go to just a few and leave the rest behind. It's also fair to say that a lot of the technology, and especially in things like social media, has contributed to a breakdown of societal kind of structures and values, and there's a lot more hate and separation and this thing. So I think if you're in the technology space, the key is to think about how can we make the world a better place and reduce the likelihood that whatever we are creating, while it may be commercially viable, doesn't make society more filled with rage and outrage and separation and anger. So I think that's basically what I would say the ambition should be.
Thank you so much. I think you've spared me more than enough time today than what I was expecting. Thank you to Dr. Pitia for sharing his time, his insights, and his vision with us today. This conversation has been a powerful reminder that technology is not just about innovation. It's about responsibility, integrity, and courage to build a future that unites rather than divides. This marks the close of our very first episode in the Digital Architects and Governance series. I couldn't have asked for a more inspiring start. To everyone watching, I hope today's discussion leaves you reflecting, questioning, and imagining how each of us can play a role in shaping a more inclusive digital future. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay curious, stay inspired.